We appreciate you taking the time to come out and join us for tonight. We have a full lineup. My name's Angie Bonvini. I'm the principal at HHCS for our next year. We also have our current principal, Marianne Van Gore, is joining us tonight. And we have a full panel here of experts and teachers and current and past parents from the Arrowsmith program. And then of course we welcome any guests to the program as well. And we're also partnering with Arrowsmith from Toronto. So we're excited about that and just the information that you'll hear. So I just want to give you a little bit of an outline of the evening. First, we're going to hear from Debbie Gilmore, and she's the executive director at Arrowsmith, and they're based in Toronto. So we're very, very excited to hear from her in just a moment. Then we'll take a few questions. If you have questions throughout the presentation, there is a chat feature. So you can find that if you take your mouse, if you're on a computer, and just move it down to the bottom, a participant list will come up and then a chat there. So if you click on that, you're welcome to put any questions that you have in that throughout the presentation. And then I'll be monitoring that as well. So we can ask Debbie any of those questions that do come up. I'll also be monitoring them because later on in the presentation, we do want to hear from one of our graduates from the program and his parents. And so some of those questions may be answered there. So I will be monitoring it. And then at the end, we do hope that you will stick around and just, yeah, ask the questions. This is for you to find out more about the program. And so we're thrilled that you're here. I think that's all I have. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Debbie Gilmore. Thank you so much. We're so pleased to have you, Debbie.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's lovely to meet everyone virtually. I'm glad you could join us this evening. And it's always a pleasure for me to work with Halton Hills Christian School, because in fact, it was Halton Hills Christian School, was one of the schools that I first visited when I learnt about the Arrowsmith program. And sorry, I forgot to share my screen. Sorry, everyone. I need to find that. And sorry, can everyone see that now? Good. So one of the first, my first encounters with schools that offered the Arrowsmith program was with Halton Hills Christian School, and Marianne Van Gore was just absolutely wonderful in introducing me to the program. So it's always a great pleasure to do anything that that involves Halton Hills Christian School. I thought I'd start off by telling you a little bit about myself. Sorry, let me just go over this. First of all, I've broken down the presentation this evening in 3 sections. Firstly, just to tell you a little bit about neuroplasticity and the background of the Arrowsmith program and how it was developed. Along with an explanation of some of the cognitive functions that the program has, and hopefully you'll know a little bit more about what I mean by cognitive functions by the end of my presentation, and then just to tell you a little bit about the research. So that's how I think the evening will run. But I have to tell you a little bit about myself, because many times I'm asked, how did I come to be introduced to Arrowsmith? And so it came about in a couple of different ways, actually. First of all, at 3.5, my son, who you see on the screen here, was diagnosed with a learning difficulty. I had been a teacher and educator all my career. And when he was born and then we noticed the learning difficulties that he had, I kind of knew school was going to be a little difficult for him, because in my understanding of learning difficulties at that time was really, you know, there's not much you can do with a learning difficulty except really help the student or the child work around the difficulty. And he had all the really best programs and early intervention in school. So, but life was a struggle for him, especially school. And in 2010, 20 years ago, sorry, 10 years ago now, in fact, this time has just ticked over the 10-year mark, a colleague gave me the book, The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. Now, I'm not really certain, if you've heard of that book, but many people have first been introduced to Arrowsmith through that book. And chapter 2, my colleague said to me, read chapter 2, because it was all about the Arrowsmith program. So I opened that chapter 2, and on those pages, I read the life of my son. The struggles of Barbara Arrowsmith Young when she was at school and growing up. And even though the circumstances were slightly different and the names were changed and we were on different continents, the struggle and the pain that my son was going through was definitely the struggle and pain that Barbara had gone through, and the other stories that she had that Norman had in that chapter. It just so happened that in 2010, I was visiting Toronto for work. At the time, I was the head of diverse learning needs at Sydney Catholic Schools, a system of Catholic schools of about 160 schools. And in my role as head of diverse learning needs, my role was to look for programs to support schools, to help schools with their students with diverse needs, so that, special education, learning difficulties, gifted education, the whole gamut of diverse needs. And we were looking for programs to help our students with learning difficulties specifically, because while schools were doing their very, very best to help these students, we knew that their progress was not what we should expect when we were putting our best teachers, our best programs, and the most resources we could find for into those students, and we really weren't, finding that progress. So I stopped off. As I said, I was going to Toronto. I stopped off in the Arrowsmith School. I thought, I must go and see it. I spent a couple of hours with Tara Bonner, who was our principal at the time, and I saw the students working away in their program and individual programs, and I thought, wow, these students are engaged, they're working by themselves, and I know what these students look like in a regular classroom, in a regular academic classroom, and it's not really what I saw. And so what I went away and learned more about neuroplasticity, and when I went back to work, in Sydney, sorry, I did mention I was Sydney. I went back to work and I said to our director, actually, I think we need to look at getting Arrowsmith into our system. And so for 2 years, we worked with Arrowsmith and looked at how we could implement that in our system of schools. But by that time, my son was in grade 9, and life was getting, at high school, was getting very, very challenging for him. He was a good student. He was very compliant. But when I dropped him off to school of a morning, he would get out of the car, he would take a deep breath, and he would say, open the car door and say, here I go again, into the lion's den. And that, as a parent, and for all the parents that are here tonight, it's so challenging as a parent to hear that. And so his dad and I made a decision to bring him to Canada to go to school. At that time, there were no Arrowsmith programs in Australia. And so in 2012, he and I moved from a 28-degree day in December in Sydney to Peterborough in, you know where Peterborough is, I think we arrived there on December 31, and that photo that you can see on the screen there is his first day at school. On the first day, he said to me, at the end of the day, he said, Mum, I love this program. These teachers get me. The other students get me. And he literally, at 16 years of age, skipped to the bus stop to get home. So I kind of thought, okay, this is something different for him. So with that experience, and while I was in Peterborough, Sydney Catholic Schools decided to take on the program. And that gave him the opportunity to go back to Sydney and continue his program in Sydney. But my life as an educator was not going to be able to be the same again. I could not go back into education and not have Arrowsmith in that world. So I was extremely lucky, and Barbara Arrowsmith Young asked me that when I went back to Sydney if I could speak with schools in Sydney, in Australia and New Zealand about the Arrowsmith program, which I was more than happy to do, because I could see the benefits of the program for my child, and I could see it on all the other students in Peterborough School. And then, of course, that is the year I met Marion and the folk at Halton Hills Christian School. So my son then continued the program in Sydney. So he did a year in Peterborough. He did 18 months in Sydney. And then Barbara asked me to move to Toronto with the whole family and take up this current position that I have, which we gladly did. We were all very happy because all of us know the benefits of this program for students, and we all wanted to be part of that. And so my son finished his program in the adult program in Toronto, and then went on to finish his high school diploma, and he's just finished his first year of his college course. And so, you know, it's been life-changing for him. It's not only been life-changing for him, it's been life-changing for our family. And we are doing things now that we never thought we were going to be able to do. He's doing things that weren't even in our vision for him. So we are, you know, all extremely happy. And in fact, it was a day last year, he said to me, he is 24 now. He said to me, "Mum, my life started when I started Arrowsmith." That's the impact that it's made on him. So enough from me, but I do like to tell you my story, because quite often through my presentation, I bring up my son and I use him as an example. So it's good for you to know that about me. So let's move on. And so what is the Arrowsmith program? Actually, it's a suite of cognitive programs that are comprised of very intensive yet graduated cognitive exercises. So I explained that it's a cognitive program, not an academic program. And I always like to say the cognitive program helps the ability for the student to, by strengthening that cognitive work, help the academic program. So this is a suite of cognitive exercises, and they're designed to target, stimulate, and strengthen cognitive functions. It's for school-age students, it's for adult students, and in fact, it's an individual program and based around cognitive functioning. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It is a facilitator-led program. So it's not a program that students just do online or by themselves with no interaction with anyone. It's a facilitator-led program. And Heather, who's the teacher, Arrowsmith teacher at Halton Hills, knows right now in this extremely challenging sometimes or unique position we are currently in, we still have a facilitator-led program that students are doing at home. And so that's been a very new process for all of us in the Arrowsmith world, but from all accounts, and I've spoken with teachers and from all around the world, everyone has students, sorry, excuse me, all the Arrowsmith students are working at home with their program, with the teachers working with them right now. So we're really, really happy with how we've been able to move on to into that system. You'll see there on the screen, we have 19 different exercises for 19 different cognitive functions, and I'm going to go through some of those in a moment. The programs are individual. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So the program is tailored around someone's cognitive profile. I've already mentioned the program was developed by Barbara Arrowsmith Young in 1978 and built on the concepts of neuroplasticity. Barbara herself had huge challenges with learning. In fact, there were no labels in the days when she was at school, but if we were to label her difficulties now, we'd probably say she was a twice exceptional student. So highly gifted, yet had huge struggles with learning. And so it was from her research of the science of neuroplasticity and the work done in cognitive functioning that she developed the program for herself and then has developed that for others and brought that out into the world. So what is this concept of neuroplasticity? Well, it's really simple actually. It's the concept that the brain can change. So that it's plastic. So the brain can change its physical structure, its functional organization, and it forms new neural connections. And the good thing, I just had a birthday the other day, the really good thing is that neuroplasticity is applicable right across our lifespan. So that is really fantastic. The lines of research that Barbara Arrowsmith Young used for her to develop the program came from these two gentlemen, Alexander Luria and Mark Rosenschwab. And Alexander Luria was a Russian neuropsychologist who had mapped the brain of soldiers that had head injuries from in Russia after World War II. And so he would ask the soldiers, what can't you do now that you could do before your head injury? And he mapped those cognitive functions. And his hypothesis was that these cognitive functions work together in neural networks to carry out complex tasks. So what Barbara did was find the areas that she was having difficulty with in her life, so she was able to pinpoint the cognitive functions that were weak for her. She then coupled that work with the research of Mark Rosenschwab, and he was working in, at that time, this is in around about 1977, he was working with rats and looking at stimulating that cognitive change. So he found that through stimulation of certain areas of the brains were changing in rats. What he found through stimulated enrichment of environment for rats, he was able to see that they had improved performances on mazes, which is, of course, is like a little IQ test for rats. There were increased levels of neurotransmitters, more glia cells, enlarged capillaries, more dendrites, and all, of course, which are required for that brain change. And he was looking at those rats compared to other rats that had no enriched environment. So even though in 1970s there were no research on neuroplasticity in humans, Barbara took his work and said, well, surely if there's neuroplasticity in rats, there's neuroplasticity in humans. And then she went about to design 3 different exercises to target and strengthen the cognitive functions that were weak for her. So she putting those 2 lines of research together, what we know is that not only is the brain made up of very specific cognitive areas or functions, but these areas can be targeted, stimulated, and strengthened. And you'll hear me say that a couple of times, targeted, stimulated, and strengthened, because that's what is required. They're the states that are required for cognitive stimulation and neuroplasticity to occur. So what the Arrowsmith program is then, we call it a capacity-based program, because unlike other programs that work around the difficulty, actually a capacity-based program changes the learner. We're actually changing the brains of learners. So rather than modifying the work or the environment, we're actually changing the learner. So as I mentioned, these cognitive functions are a characteristic function or a job of a region of the brain. It works on a continuum. So our languages, you can use any language that works for you here, but it can be anywhere from a severe functioning to superior functioning. And all of us have some sort of functioning on that continuum of various different cognitive functions. So let me talk a little bit about what those cognitive functions may be. So let me start with the prefrontal cortex. We have the left and the right prefrontal cortex. We sometimes call that the executive functioning area of the brain. And So there's two functions that we can strengthen there. The first one you'll see on the screen there is in the right prefrontal cortex, and that is the capacity of the brain for understanding non-verbal cues. That we require these in social settings, on the playground for students. Even in the classroom, we're looking at non-verbal cues. So that's one. And if we skip down on the left-hand side to the third one, that's in the left prefrontal cortex, and that's the executive functioning for thinking, planning, and problem solving. So both areas of the brain are actually all about planning and organizing. One in the left prefrontal, that is in language, and in the right in the non-verbal area of what we do every day. Then there are visual memory functions. So those are functions that we require for learning to read and spell. We also have the capacity to grasp relationships. And in fact, it was one of these cognitive functions, this cognitive function, that was very difficult for Barbara. And so not only understanding the relationships between people, but the relationships between concepts. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. And then we have auditory functions that are required for retaining various sorts of information. And there's a number of auditory memory functions, depending on what sort of information we're trying to remember. Then there's the capacity for quantification. So we need that, not only is that mental mathematics, it's not just that though, because we use that function when we are scheduling time, when we're looking at budgeting, you know, when you go into a shop and you think, okay, this is going to cost me about this much. That's all that quantification sense. There's the ability to learn motor patterns. So we have automated motor plans when we speak, when we write, when we read. Our automated motor plan is to track across the page. That's a motor function. And then there's another function that is the capacity to recognize faces. So you may have read or heard of the book by Oliver Sacks, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. That gentleman had a difficulty in this cognitive function because he couldn't recognize faces. And then there's spatial reasoning. So they're just some of the cognitive functions. Arrowsmith Program can address 19 of those cognitive functions, and that's not all that is our brain is, they're not all the cognitive functions of the brain, but certainly they're a very, very large subset of what we require for our learning every day, not just academic learning, but just getting through life and learning every day. So every individual has a unique learning profile with a combination of strengths and weaknesses in those different cognitive functions. And if you're interested, you can go onto our website, and on there you will see the Arrowsmith Program Cognitive Profile Questionnaire. There's about 200 questions, and in there you might want to just check yourself. You will be able to answer the questions, and then at the end of the questionnaire it will say whether you have a difficulty in any of these cognitive functions that the Arrowsmith Program can address. So the cognitive, the conditions for neuroplastic change that we need are these three things: active engagement, effortful processing, and novel task. So active engagement, we know we can't just sit behind a computer or sit at a desk in class and then all of a sudden we can learn. We know that we have to be actively engaged in that learning process. We also know that if we do something that's too easy, we're not going to learn because we just already know it. But also if we do something that's too hard, we're not going to be able to get out of that as much as we can, because the brain won't be able to click into that because it's actually too hard. So there's this concept of effortful processing. And in the education world, we kind of talk about that around about the 90% level. So you're working at that 90% level. So, and then the other condition for neuroplastic change is that something has to be novel. So if you ever walk into an Arrowsmith classroom or see students doing an Arrowsmith exercise, you'll wonder about what it is that they're doing, because it doesn't look like anything that we've seen before. And that's because we need the brain to be working on something that they can't attach prior knowledge to, because we're trying to strengthen particular functions of the brain. And they're the principles of the Arrowsmith Program. A task is designed that stimulates a very specific cognitive function. Remember Rosenschwag's work? We need targeted differential stimulation. So each exercise is specifically targeting a particular cognitive function. The students start at a certain level, and then they work and work and work on that particular level of the exercise. And when they achieve that, or we call it mastery, then we let them celebrate that for a little while you see that young man on the screen there. But then what we do is we make it a little bit harder. Not too hard, because then, as I said, it can't be too hard. It has to be that effortful processing. So we just notch it up a little bit, and then they work away again. And that's how students work through the levels of the exercise. We also take away their supports. Now, it's not possible to take it away, all of them away, but what we try and do is we make them work on an exercise by themselves. It has to happen in their brain. And what we try and stop them doing is bringing in known information into that exercise as they're working through it. Because what that does, I mean, typically when we do a task, we will use our areas of strength to do that task. So what we have to do with the students is try and not get them to use those areas of strength. And that is the critical role of an Arrowsmith teacher, is to try and help the students do those exercises without bringing their areas of strength in. So our Arrowsmith teachers around the world are highly skilled in observing students and looking at how they're doing those exercises, making sure they're not bringing in their areas of strength. And then, of course, there's mastery criteria built into those exercises that reward the students for accuracy, consistency, and automaticity. One of the things that I loved when I first came across the Arrowsmith program was that it works so well with an academic program. Because, as I said before, a cognitive program gives that, is the building blocks for an academic program for students to work through that. So I'm going to take two examples of academic areas. So if you look at reading, this helps, I always feel this helps understand how these cognitive functions work together. So if you look at reading, the task of reading, actually, there are 8 cognitive functions required to read. Now, you'll see those there, that either there's the broker's speech pronunciation. So that's how we pronounce words. There's symbol recognition. That's fairly easy to understand. So to read, you need to be able to recognize what those symbols are. There's lexical memory, which is remembering words, like it's like the filing cabinet, and we're trying to pluck out the words that we need to describe something or the name of something. Symbol relations is critical in reading, because what that is that comprehension component. This is the cognitive function that is required for understanding relationships, cause and effect. You can imagine how difficult it is, and this is, my son had this at a very severe level. Reading, he was a beautiful reader, his symbol recognition was beautiful, so he could decode the words really, really well. However, he didn't understand a thing he was reading. So you can imagine, really, is that reading? For me as an educator, it's kind of only half of reading. And it's frustrating for someone when you're supposed to be getting pleasure or gaining information from a text. You're not getting that. Then there's memory for information in remembering what is read and heard. Just imagine if you're reading a book and you're up to chapter 2, but you've forgotten what happened in chapter 1. So that's also very incredibly difficult. There's symbolic thinking. That is that left prefrontal cortex I was talking about before, that planning and organizing and getting the main idea of something. So you need that when you read. And of course, you need motor symbol sequencing, which is automated motor plans. That's the eye tracking component of reading. And we know if students that have a difficulty in that, when they read, their eyes go up to the line above or down below. They miss words as they go along. They miss punctuation. So again, just imagine reading like that. It's very, very difficult for students to get meaning from text. Now, I missed one down the bottom. Kinesthetic speech. I always talk about these components like broker's speech and kinesthetic speech, because when we assess reading, quite often it's in oral form. So in that oral form, sometimes that's a difficulty in getting meaning across about how, or getting someone to understand how well you can read if you can't pronounce words or you don't have that kinesthetic speech working well. But there are 8 cognitive functions for reading. There are 7 for mathematics, and actually most of them are the same. So you'll have a look here: symbol relations, memory for information, symbol recognition, symbolic thinking, motor symbol sequencing. So while sometimes we say that someone is really good at English or they're really good at maths, actually, if you have difficulties in those cognitive functions, you're going to have challenges in both of those areas, because we still need those cognitive functions. There's 2 that are different for mathematics. That is quantification sense. I talked about that before, when you have that mental mathematics. And then predicative speech. You need that in your mathematics in terms of its understanding a series or an order of operations. So I like to explain those cognitive functions in terms of those academic areas. And I'm really conscious that I'm running a little bit out of time, but I'm going to talk about symbol relations because this is truly one of the most critical cognitive functions that we need in our lives. We need this to be working really well. This is the area of the brain between it's called the angular gyrus, where it is surrounded by the occipital, temporal, and parietal lobes. And those lobes are responsible for bringing information into the brain and then connecting it. This cognitive function connects that new information with old information. So bringing those pieces of information together. Learning is very difficult if you can't make those connections. It is also a cognitive function we cannot accommodate around. So if you have a difficulty in executive function or planning or scheduling, sometimes we can put accommodations for that. Sometimes if you have a memory difficulty, we can put accommodations for that. You cannot accommodate for this cognitive function. So I've talked about this. It's that concept. It's right across all aspects of learning. It's quickly grasping what we read and hear. Understanding cause and effect, that mathematical reasoning, which is what I talked to you about. What we see after students have worked on this cognitive function is improvements in reading comprehension. It's not only reading comprehension, it's what you're hearing in everyday language. In fact, this is one of the first things that people found when I went home to Sydney after my son had done the program in Peterborough. They said, wow, he's so much more engaged in conversation. Because before in conversation, what he would do, he would just mimic what everyone else was doing in their actions, because actually he didn't really understand anything that was happening in conversation. He was fine if he started the conversation because he knew the topic, but to join into a conversation was almost impossible for him. So he would mimic, he'd nod his head and laugh at the appropriate times. But when we took him back up from Peterborough, people go, wow, he's now in a conversation. So this is what is important here. I always call this cognitive function the connect the dots, because this is what pulls all information together. I'm going to talk about one more, and I'm sorry, then I'll stop. I'm just a little over time, but this non-verbal thinking, I talked about this. This is in the right prefrontal cortex, and it is it's responsible for understanding those non-verbal cues. And I talk about this because sometimes in academics we forget the importance of non-verbal cues. And I'd just like to show you this. We have had students, when we assess students, all Arrowsmith students in the full-time and part-time program have an assessment. And we use this picture. So we ask students, what can you see in this picture? So an 18-year-old girl said, they're playing badminton. And so you look at that picture and you go, wow, how is that possible? Well, what she did, I think you can see my cursor on the screen there. See the netting on that person's hat. So what happened is when you have a difficulty in this area, you hone in on one piece and then you make up the story around that one piece. So she honed in on the netting and then thought, okay, that's netting, that's badminton. Another student said they're at City Hall in Toronto. Why did she say that? Because she saw this bunting down the front here, this roped off area. And when she had been at City Hall the week before, that's what she saw, roped off area like that. So she said, okay, I know that's City Hall in Toronto, they must be at City Hall. So someone that has a deficit in this area, sometimes they can be called liars, because actually it's not that they're lying, it's that this is their world. They grab onto one aspect of what they're seeing in a social setting or what they're seeing, you know, in an interaction. They grab onto that and they're, oh, that's what must be happening. And everyone else around them goes, well, no, that's not happening. So it's incredibly, incredibly difficult. There's research on our website. I won't go into that now unless someone has a question at the end, but I've got the website address there to get this research summary document. This outlines all of the research that we have. We've got 21 completed studies with over 700 students in those studies. 19 schools have been involved in these research studies over 4 countries with different researchers and in different research frameworks. And in that summary document, you will see all the Arrowsmith research that has happened across the universities and in schools. So I will stop there and then Angie will be able to take over from me now. So I have to stop sharing my screen and then hand it over to Angie.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's always remarkable to hear your personal story with your son. That's just, it's powerful. And I think, yeah, hearing that we can relate to knowing students and people who are struggling in that area, and your heart goes out, and what can we do? So thank you so much. And then the research on top of that, and the science behind it. So I didn't mention this earlier, and I wanted to do that now. So Halton Hills Christian School, we like to call ourselves the satellite for the Arrowsmith program. And then the program that Debbie is the executive director of in Toronto, that's kind of the mothership. So we run the program that they have created, and Barbara Arrowsmith Young has created through all that research. And we're pleased to do that. And we're so thrilled that we have Heather Takaki running that program as our teacher. She's been through a lot of training to be able to do that, and she does it well. So Marianne Van Gore, I just want to pass it to you. I don't see any questions in the chat. I would encourage you to, if you do have any, please do add them there. But Marianne, you can introduce our next speaker.
Okay. Thank you, Angie, very much. It's good to be with you here tonight. And I can say that as the 15 years I've been at Halton Hills Christian School, I think 12 of those years have had the Arrowsmith program, and it's been a real honor and privilege to watch students come in with it defeated sometimes with what school is doing to them, I say, rather than with them, but to them. And then what Arrowsmith is able to bring in. And my mantra is Arrowsmith is a program that offers hope and delivers change. And so one family that was I don't know if they were in our first cohort, but very near the beginning, is the Murray family. And Kathy and Oliver Murray enrolled their son Michael into our program. I think Michael came to us in 5th grade. And I'll let him tell you a little bit more about his story. But Michael now is at U of T, and he can't even stay the whole hour because he's got an exam tomorrow. And I think had Kathy and Murray even dreamed that day, those years ago, that their son would one day be at U of T, that seems so far away, but yet we can claim that it's true. So it's just with a joyful heart that I welcome Oliver and Kathy and Michael. So I'm not sure of the three who's going to speak first. We didn't sort that out. So if one of you want to unmute yourself and take over.
I think I'll let Michael tell his story and then he can go and do his work.
Excellent, because we want him to pass, Kathy.
We do.
All right, welcome, Michael. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what Arrowsmith has meant to you?
Yes, of course. Thank you all for having me here, and thank you for understanding the situation that I have to, get right back to studying.
We
right
are
after this,
proud,
but
Michael. We are proud.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so to explain kind of my situation and all that, before Arrowsmith, I feel like there's kind of 3 points to this. It's, before, during, and after, and to basically simplify it like that. Well, before my family ever knew of Arrowsmith, we tried everything. We tried Kumon, we tried Sylvan, we tried tutors and stuff. All of these different programs, they never really got it. They thought it just like giving extra homework would be the easiest thing to do, and it just never clicked. I was diagnosed with profound dyslexia, poor penmanship, not being able to read and stuff like that. And at my last school, before I went to Halton Hills, a teacher even said I was unteachable, which is totally untrue, as I'm now at U of T studying Celtic Studies. So from being unable to read anything to be reading Celtic texts is a profound thing. With that, one quick second. Something is going on. Apologies. Yes, apologies for that. My computer just went off with something. Anyway, continuing, during Arrowsmith, there was a fair bit of difference. I was able to fix that, thank you. Yes, so when I went to Arrowsmith, we tried going to Toronto first, as it was the closest, but unfortunately there just wasn't any room at that time. So we went to the location in Peterborough. We went there for about a year, and then we found ourselves going to Halton Hills at grade 5. Very far away from where we used to live, so I had to almost take like an hour ride journey all the way back and forth. It was pretty intensive, but it was worth every single moment. It was extremely hard work for me. As someone who, despised school and all the things that they put you through, I was a bit suspicious to begin with, to be honest with Arrowsmith. It took a bit of time for me to kind of get into it, but the one thing that I did appreciate out of everything, looking back at my life and all that, would be the fact that I learned a lot about practice and dedication, and I learned a lot about just keep going at it, because at the end of the day, the thing that I did the most in Arrowsmith that I remember, it was doing the homework and being able to constantly get out consecutive rounds of homework and just keep on working and focusing in on that. Because even though if I wasn't, I could control that. I could control how much I did it, how well I did it. I could focus on that, and that was something that I could take pride in, that I could complete as much homework as more than many people. There was, I believe there's still an award at HHCS for the most homework completed. I'm not sure if it's still around, but I do remember that. After I was actually eventually able to read, I actually read the Irish Constitution to my mother for Mother's Day as a kind of present for her. It was a big deal, as being not able to read at all, being able to read a legal document like that was pretty significant. My skill, I was always fascinated with stories even as a kid, but now being able to read them for myself, I was able to open a whole labyrinth of different types of stories and narratives and such. I'm actually reading the Silmarillion right now, which is a very, very dense literature of Tolkien, and it's very different than, Caillou or anything like that. And it also helped me kind of make friends, because back when I wasn't able really to read, I was very self-conscious about those things, and it was really difficult for self-esteem. But being able to learn how to read, being able to learn how to make friends, it really did change my life a lot, in more ways than one, I would say. And like I said, I'm now at U of T. This is my second year studying in the Celtic Studies program. It's phenomenal what this program has done for me. And I would say the metaphor I try to explain to people when they ever ask, well, what was it like being in this program? I say it's like my learning-based disability was like concrete. It was a dry cement, or whatever you would like to call it. And all these programs before Arrowsmith were just throwing seeds at it, hoping that something would stick, hoping that something would grow from that. Arrowsmith was the pick we needed to chip away at this concrete, so that if we did put something in there, it could actually grow and flourish. And I think that that's kind of the easiest way of explaining it from my perspective. And to be honest, it is quite a marvelous thing, and I am very, very fortunate to my family and I to have found Arrowsmith in the time that we had, and that we were determined and tenacious to get to where we are now. That's about it.
Michael, thank you so much. It's so good to hear your story again. And I don't know if you remember, in grade 8, you and I were reading the same books at the same time.
I do remember that.
And that was lovely for us to just share that, and to think how far you came in just a few years. So congratulations, and we wish you the very best on that exam tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
And I do want to hear one day that you've graduated university too.
Indeed.
So Mom, Kathy, do you want to say what it was like as a parent to come to this decision?
Yeah, it was actually Oliver that found the Arrowsmith program. And we were just so glad that he did, because we, as Michael said, we sort of searched for everything. And it was like, we didn't have a plan B. This, this was it. Or this was our plan B. We tried everything else, and it was like, well, okay, give this a try. And so obviously it looks very different. The homework was really different, because prior to that, I was trying to help Michael with his homework and sit with him and read with him and read for him and all of that. And it just wasn't working, and it was so painful. So when he got Arrowsmith homework, I couldn't help. Yay! Like there was a piece of, he has to do it for himself, this part, that was kind of freeing for me. I mean, I did hover around in the kitchen and kind of was there, but there was nothing I could do. Like, he had to do the work. And it was also a big thing of like, just trust that it's going to work, because he's sitting there with the eye patch on doing these tracing. I'm thinking, I have no idea if anything is happening. None. So there's an element of faith, trust, whatever, that it's going to work. Now, I do have a background in physiotherapy, and for us, if somebody's had a stroke, I always thought of it this way, that if somebody's had a stroke, we can give them a gait aid and say, there you go, you can walk with the gait aid forever, but you'll always walk with a limp. Or we can actually teach somebody how to walk again. But that takes a lot of practice, like a lot. And I thought, well, I know how much that practice takes. So if this is helping him without his gait aid, it's going to take a lot of practice. So you just keep practicing there, Michael. You just keep doing it, and eventually, hopefully, things will change. And they absolutely did. So it was a really good experience for us. A bit of trepidation, because he didn't have a whole lot of academics that went with the programming. Because when we started, we did the assessment, and out of 19 areas, Michael had 16. And, the teachers, probably Heather, Joan at the time said, we can't do 16 with him. We're going to have to choose the ones that are most profound, hoping that if we do the most profound ones, some of the others will come along with it. And he's not on now, but Oliver and I were texting each other as you were talking, Debbie, and saying, maybe he needs to revisit some of these things. You know, there are areas that's like math is still, he just doesn't do math. Let's put it that way.
But he graduated high school.
He did graduate high school, and
Right.
he did get his necessary math for that,
Yeah.
but that's not his thing. And I thought, you know what? Math is not everybody's thing, so, but you won't function in society if you can't read. That's the way we looked at it. So that was kind of a focus too. So I'll stop talking. I don't know if Oliver wants to say anything, but.
Yeah, is Oliver there?
Yeah.
I haven't seen
I am.
him yet.
Hi, Marianne. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Oliver.
So good to see you all. And just to pick up on what Kathy said, I think in addition to the things that's been spoken about the Arrowsmith program, it's the community at the school in Halton Hills in Georgetown that really, I would have to say, really developed a personalized program for Michael. And we were very grateful for that, because that really kind of dealt with the fact that he presented with 16 of these deficiencies, and so really worked around what he needed, but also our lifestyle, because he was commuting from Burlington or from Port Credit, depending on which one of us he was staying with. And you know, while we're obviously hugely proud of him being able to go to university, it's not easy. It's not easy for him. It's not easy for his parents, because it's not, there's been huge advances, but it's not a switch going off and he's suddenly quote unquote normal. And so it's still very challenging for him. I would say he has to work harder than most of the normal students. And he has to make sure he gets all the accessibility services that are available to him. And he needs still a lot of help from us and from others, from the village that we've put around him. But I always say and believe that despite where we were told he would end up, there's a university degree inside him. And it's Arrowsmith, it's his mother, it's the people around him, it's all of us trying to pull that out of him and give him that he deserves. So, but I would just say that it's hard work for everybody, the whole family, but it can be done, and it goes on, the hard work. But you know, as Michael said, we were told he was unteachable, wouldn't amount to anything. Still has a lot of work to do to get his degree, to get the degree out of him, but it's going to happen. I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. So thank you, Marianne.
You're welcome.
Great to see everybody. And if Kathy and I can help in any way, answer any questions, we're here to do that. So good luck, everybody, on your journey.
Thank you very much. Angie, I'll turn that over to you. I don't know if you want to let Michelle Cromack just speak for a moment or introduce her.
Yeah, I would love to do that, actually. So yeah, we have some alumni here, some graduates, and we're just so excited about that. Sean, when I saw you hop on the screen, I got really excited. So Sean Cromack is actually one of our athletes of the year. And I had the privilege of coaching him in volleyball, which is just so exciting. So it's good to see you. If he was standing up, you'd see how tall he is. But Michelle, what do you have anything that you want to add or share as a parent as well? And then you just have to unmute yourself. I might be able to do that.
There we go.
Perfect.
Hi everyone. Thanks for coming out and spending some time this way. It's great. I brought Sean in here after hearing Michael, because Sean actually won the homework a year for 2 years. I worked really hard to make it all 3, but he had someone in the way of that, so he got 2, and we have them hung up in his wall in his room. You want to say hi?
Hello, my name's Sean. I mean, Arrowsmith is probably like the best thing that could like ever happen, and like if anyone could take it, like I highly recommend it, because like to me, still to this day, like I still think about it. Still kind of wish I was there, you know, like sometimes when I'm in high school, I'm like, can I just go back to where I was just in Arrowsmith with all of them? So yeah,
So the Arrowsmith program has also allowed Sean to be very confident in school. He has to get up and catch the bus at 6:50 in the morning, and I don't ever have to wake him up. He's social. He's very social at school, so he enjoys that. He has a good relationship with all of his teachers in high school, so the transition's been good. He has outside supportive tutoring to keep building on making sure everything's okay for him and his grades and things like that. So his transition into high school was a good experience. He does have some high school challenges like every other teenager. But I was nervous for the transition, but it worked out really well because he was going into high school with nobody that came from HHCS other than Orly, but you know, like a guy, a friend or anything like that. He didn't have anyone to go with. So he kind of went there on his own. And he kind of went into there with his head up strong and knew that. Also, to just mention too, he also was pulled back in grade 6 so that we can do 3 years at Arrowsmith. So he went into grade 9 being a grade 10. So that wasn't easy either. But he went in there with confidence. A lot of kids knew that he was a year older from hockey friends that were already in grade 10 when Sean was in grade 9. And he just said, I had a learning difference and I went to a private school and did a program. And I had to pull myself back for grade 6 so I can continue and do the program for 3 years so I can get something out of it. So just a lot of confidence, and that's pretty much where the program allowed Sean to come into his own for that reason. Do you want to add anything?
Thank you so much.
I don't know if you want. I don't know if you wanted to know any history. I'm not sure how long I really had, but we did find out the program through people that we knew, because we were kind of like investigating and just asking around, because we didn't want to put Sean through a regular stream. We knew something needed to happen. He was diagnosed in grade 1 with a learning disability.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle. I don't see any questions on the chat, but we do have a couple minutes left. Is there anyone? We have Heather Takaki, again, like I said, the teacher that runs our Arrowsmith program. Marianne Van Gore, who, as she said, has been here for 15 years, and at the start of Arrowsmith being started at HHCS, so she has a lot of experience right from the get-go. Debbie is here as well.
I wonder, Angie, if you want to talk about how we have Arrowsmith in a regular stream school. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of our students in Arrowsmith, they are in the Arrowsmith classroom, and like Debbie spoke to, their program is individualized. So depending on what their needs are, that's how long they're actually in the Arrowsmith program. So it could be, we have an 8-period day, so 6 periods or 5 or 4, depending on what their program needs. But each student in Arrowsmith is also part of a homeroom classroom. And at HHCS, we really believe in community, and in our homeroom classrooms, making sure that kids are connected. So we purposefully, at the beginning and end of each day, all of our students are connected to that homeroom classroom and a homeroom teacher. They have lunch with those students, recesses all together. Math and language, typically, our students in Arrowsmith, because they're at different levels, varying levels, there are smaller support groups. So our Arrowsmith students do take math and language. But beyond that, the other subjects, so things you would typically think, science, geography, socials, those kinds of things, Arrowsmith students don't typically go into. There's a little bit of flexibility depending on how intense their program is. So for a particular student, they may just need something like art or phys ed to break up their week. And so they could be in something like that. Again, very individualized based on the needs of the student. And so Heather Takaki creates that program after the initial assessment happens. But very connected to homeroom classrooms and their peers as well. But they're a family also. So there are students, I think we had 10, Heather? 10 this year in the classroom, and they range from grade 4 right up to grade 8. So they become their own family as well, because they understand how much work they're putting into it. You heard from parents, you heard from students. It is a lot of work. And so these students are united by that hard work and that dedication. Marianne, anything you want to add to that?
Well, just that students in Arrowsmith, they're not like a separate little entity unto themselves. They are a community, just like the grade 1 classes or the grade 7 classes, but they're fully immersed in the life of the school. So they, like Sean, it was Sean that got the student male athlete of the year. I think that year another Arrowsmith student got the female athlete award. You know, they're in our clubs, in our musicals, whatever else is going on in the school. These students are fully immersed, so they're not set aside. They are part of HHCS and a very important part of HHCS.
We brag about them a lot, actually. So we're always saying, oh, they're the hardest working students in the school, and absolutely that is true. And the other students know it.
I think there's a question in the chat there.
All right. So the question is, how do students get assessed for the appropriateness of Arrowsmith for them? That's a great question. Heather, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, so there is an online questionnaire at the Arrowsmith School website, but I mean, certainly sometimes parents kind of know too without even doing that questionnaire. There's sort of been a paper trail. Sometimes there are those formal assessments that have been done, but yeah, you can certainly take a look there. Besides the questionnaire, there's a number of different pages about the different cognitive areas, what they're responsible for. And sometimes we've just said to parents, take a look, and you might be checking off a number of different things because that's what you see in your child, and kind of a good starting point. And by all means, feel free to contact me at school, and we can have a conversation via email or by phone too. Either or will work if you have questions.
And so typically the students that are in this program, the longer you're in it, the more it can change the brain, because it's neuroplasticity works on the intensity of what's happening. So of course, the more intense you're working out that muscle, the more the change is going to happen. So we've had a student start in grade 2, I believe, was the earliest. But yeah, the longer the better, but then looking at the student's profile and their learning needs and making sure that they're assessed is really important. What we're gonna do actually is Angie Shepherd is going to follow up with all of our participants and just share some information, share the research that Debbie Gilmore has given. And then also, I believe, Angie, if you want to just speak to this for a moment, but an assessment that you could even do, sort of profile your child based on some of these questions. And that may be very helpful to you as you consider this even further. Angie, anything to add to that?
Yes, I'm going to send that out electronically to all of you that have registered tonight. and along with some of the links that Debbie Gilmore had mentioned through her slideshow presentation. So you will be getting an email from me, and that'll give you also an opportunity to ask any further questions after you've left here that have, you know, just come up after the webinar, and I can then direct you to the appropriate people at our school that can answer those questions. If it's something admission based about how you enroll at HHCS, and that's our acronym, how you enroll at our school, I strongly suggest that you go to our website and just peek around there as well. There you will find all of the tuition information there, and then we can discuss that as well through the email if you do have further questions. But just to go back to what Angie said, there is this questionnaire. It isn't something that we use to enroll your child at our school, but we often give it out in our enrollment package when you're considering Arrowsmith, and it just allows you as parents to kind of go through, answer some of these questions, and it might actually sort of affirm what you believe, just to know that maybe this is the right program for your son or daughter. Did I hear us mention the 2 forms of testing that can be done? Like, we do assessment at HHCS, but there is an assessment they can do through Arrowsmith as well. Is that something anyone wants to touch on, or?
Well, we do an assessment when a student's enrolled, and we do a pre-assessment, and that's to put them in the program, right? To make the individualized program.
Yep. There's the 2 forms, but yeah, we do it both through the Toronto school, or you can do it through us. Yeah. If you do it through us, that's part of our package. But some people have done the actual the testing through the school as well. We've had students come to us through that way too.
Exactly the same sort of testing. And what happens is from that assessment, we create that cognitive profile I talked about. And then all of the assessment that happens right across the world in our all the sites, all of that comes back into our database, and our system creates that individual program for the student based on the range of cognitive functions across that continuum. Basically what we're doing is triaging the most critical cognitive functions that the student needs to work on in their first year. And sometimes people think, well, isn't that all the severe areas? Well, actually it's not. There are some cognitive functions that are way more critical for learning than others. So what we do is we really try to hit those most critical cognitive functions first. So given all those permutations of strengths and weaknesses across those range of cognitive functions, that's all built into our database now. Prior to that, Barbara used to do them all individually, but now it's in our system. And then all of that assessment comes in, we create the program, we send it out to Heather. Heather implements that program for that student. So that, and Heather will explain, get a report, we call it an initial learning profile, and Heather can explain that to parents and what the cognitive functions the student will be working on in their first year. And then what happens at the end of the year, that assessment is done again, and then we see which cognitive functions have come to average. So any that have come to average, what we do is take them out of the program, and then the next most critical cognitive functions go into the program for that student in the second year. And that's how they progress through the program.
I see another question there. How long should a student be in the Arrowsmith program? So Heather, you want to speak to that, or Debbie?
Do you want me to speak, Heather?
Sure, go ahead.
A typical program for a student with a typical learning difficulty profile is around 3 to 4 years. But again, it's an individual program, and people have an individual cognitive learning profile. It's really interesting to know that from research that we did on all the profiles, well, 1,500 profiles that we looked at. There's been about 10,000 Arrowsmith students across 40 years, but we took 1,500 profiles and we got someone to look at the uniqueness of that. 75% of those cognitive profiles were unique, and that's only over 9 cognitive functions. That's not across the whole 19. So yeah, so obviously depending on what their profile is and their progression through the program, an average is 3 to 4 years.
Thank you. And then there was just one more question there. A couple questions, but we do have a resource program that also supports students, and that's what I was talking about with the support, math and language. So Elsbeth Jones is here, and she is our Director of Learning, so our CERT, and she works very closely with many of our Arrowsmith students in creating their support math and language programs, and so that runs through our resource program as well.
I could just jump in quickly there too.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I work quite closely with Heather, and part of our role in resources, any student that is in the Arrowsmith program would have an IEP, so an individualized education plan. And so the question there about assessment, I'm not sure that it's required that you have a full psych ed to register, but I would say from a resource perspective, it is helpful to get that info, and you would likely want to do that on your journey. But we do take that information that's helpful in terms of getting kind of a clearer picture of their learning, and then we would create that plan. And then in terms of support through resource, we would, so my role is working with, we have a resource teacher that helps to oversee the support groups. And so we make sure that we schedule students to be in groups that are kind of around the same grade level. And then for their language, we do have some really great reading programs that work really well in conjunction with Arrowsmith to help build those learning and their reading skills. So we have a program called Fast Forward, which works similarly on cognitive function. And so during their learning, or sorry, during their language periods, and they are also able to access some of our resource supports as well. So yeah, so we do have that support also.
Awesome, thank you very much. Well, we are just a little bit over, about 12 minutes over the hour. If you do have any more questions, I know this is a lot of information and you may need time to process all of it, but just do look forward to that email from Angie Shepherd. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Angie can direct you to whoever's going to be the best fit for your question, whether that's as principal or resource department, whether that's directly to the Arrowsmith program through Heather or Debbie. We're happy to help and answer any questions that you have. So we just thank you so much for taking the time to come out tonight. Thank you to alumni, thank you to parents, past and current, staff for being here, and all of our guests. We appreciate that you came. Have a great night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Really appreciate you.
No problem.